Without further ado, I would like to welcome up Mr. Jake Deluise.
Oh yeah, that's a good idea. All over this thing. Before I start, I'd like to ask, are you guys ready to have a good time? All right, bit of backstory. I've always been making games since I could walk and talk, says my mom. I would take 3 objects from her kitchen table, and I would just start playing around, just to not be bored. And I've been doing this a lot, and I thought, wouldn't this be a great Masterworks topic? So here I am now. I gotta present this thing, and we can have some more fun later. Whatever kind of game you enjoy playing, whether it is a video game, board game, or card game, or even though one of those mind games you have to play, you have to get past a person in the hallway, they all have, you have to dance around them, you're like, which way are you going? They all have aspects about them that make them enjoyable for an audience. Have you guys played games before? Put your hand up. That's all of you, okay. Games are very popular among all different cultures and age groups, and have been played for hundreds and hundreds of years. Games can be very simple, like Trouble, or Snakes and Ladders, or more complicated, favoring older players such as cribbage. Some games are considered more juvenile and use less dynamics and mechanics, and thus these games are directed towards a younger target audience. Some games, like Cards Against Humanity, contain adult content and, quite obviously, target players that are ages 18 and above, grade 9 class. Whatever age you are, wherever you are, almost everyone enjoys games of some sort or another. Hello, I'm Jake, and welcome to my Masterworks presentation about games, fame, and the victorious claim. Next card. I just mentioned a few factors that play their role in games, but there's one overarching factor that seems to affect all kinds of games, and this is known as playability. Do you guys know what playability is? Put your hand up if you want to guess. Lucas, yeah.
It's how easy it is to play the game and
Okay, good guess. Playability, as game developers call it, is a game's ability to make players want to play again and again and again. Pong, released in 1972, was a very simple game where there is quite simply 2 paddles and a ball. Have you played, guys? Have you played Pong before? Put your hand up. All you old-timers out there. Despite its incredible simplicity, it required a steady hand to return the ball, and people could play against each other. Pong was very popular when it first came out and had a high level of playability. For that reason, it was a great way to introduce the concept of video games to people of the world. Another example of a very playable game is Go. Have you guys played Go before? It's really old, you guys aren't even old enough. Go is the oldest game that is still played to this date. Invented approximately 4,000 years ago. You guys are making me laugh too much. The game is incredibly simple. There are only 2 main rules to follow. There's a board with a 19 by 19 tile grid. I'm not even on the right slide. 2 players take turns placing white and black stones on the board in each square of the 19 by 19 tile grid. A player explaining the rules of the game could quite literally say, you can put your stone anywhere on the board, but if I completely surround it with my stones, I get to take it off the board. The game ends when both players don't want to or can't make any more moves. The winner of the game is the player who has more of their color stones on the board when the game ends. It's that straightforward. Despite its simplicity, this game is very complex in terms of strategy, trying to find where the best place to place your stones are to have them not taken off the board. Senet is also a very old board game. Who's played Senet here? Absolutely no one. Excellent. This board game was played in ancient Egypt as well, and it was quite small in size. The game board was also a grid of tiles, similar to Go, but this was a 3 by 10 rectangle. The game was also quite simple, and was commonly played during the time period. The set of rules players played by vary dramatically, so it is currently unknown which set of rules is the original. Ancient Egyptian games were not limited to tiled games. In the world of sports, there was the Mesoamerican ball game that was played around 1400 BCE. What are you laughing at? Similar to the other previously mentioned games, the rules of this game were not crystal clear, but with the clues given to us by its more modern descendant Ulama, The game was played in a similar way to racquetball. The only goal of both players or teams was to keep the ball in play. Sounds easy until you learn the ball weighs 9 pounds. There's something that these 3 games, Go, Senet, and the Mesoamerican ball game, have in common: simplicity. With very few rules to learn, new players can start playing quickly and begin to develop their own successful strategies. This is why so many people seem to enjoy playing relatively simple games. There are almost limitless strategies that players can use to win. Simplicity can make games awesome. It has been proven that gamers, or people that play games on a regular basis, are great at recognizing patterns. Patterns, when it comes to games, are small sets of data that players remember. In all well-made games, variations to the pattern are implemented to add to the pattern or change up the gameplay. If you will, try to imagine these patterns like a piece of music. A melody in music is a series of notes or patterns or sounds that are repeated. A recognizable melody in a piece of music is exactly like a recognizable pattern in a game. When there's no recognizable pattern, it looks like or sounds like noise. To make it easier to understand this analogy, comparing changing patterns to music, I will play a song that includes a few simple, repeating sounds that are added in slowly to music. And I'd appreciate your help in the audience to kind of play along with this. Ad-libbing here. So I'm going to ask all of you in the audience from this side, all right, from my arm, kind of over here. You guys are going to be repeating this one melody, all right? It's going to sound kind of like this. I like that. All right, so from here to the rest of the students over here, you guys are going to be repeating this. When you see the crabs do it, all right? So that's going to come in after this part. All you parents, try to listen along, kind of whistle to the melodies. It's going to be kind of windy. So once that comes in, start playing along to it. You'll see the crabs kind of hitting along, kind of follow that, all right, in the video. And I'll skip to where it actually happens. Excellent. Thank you guys. That was epic. At this point in the presentation, you might be asking, if game developers go through all the effort to make games, what's the point? Why do we play games? Is it just for fun? A lot of games are very fun and a way many people pass the time. But games are also very educational and teach lessons through gameplay. Shooter games teach the player how to aim precisely and move around a playing field strategically, generally improving hand-eye coordination. Time attack games teach the player how to complete a task quickly, and if a minor mistake is made, how to improvise, adapt, and overcome. Some games teach a player to be more thorough with problems in order to find alternative solutions or hidden secrets. No matter what kind of game you play, you are always learning something through playing it. Games teach you valuable information, just like school, but in a different way. Games are also like stories in the sense that they typically have one key lesson that is revealed throughout the game or at the very end, just like the moral of a story or author's message. In short, games are great teachers. Before I progress further, I'd like to define the word fun. Fun is a difficult word to define, so let's unpack it a little. Would anyone in the audience like to try to define fun? Anna? I like that idea. Anybody else? Lucas?
Fun. Now.
That's epic. I like how you're reading literally off the board. That's a perfect answer. The Oxford English Dictionary definition of fun is amusing, entertaining, or enjoyable. This does not explain much. Sure, a lot of activities are enjoyable, but not all of them are fun. If you watch a video with a song you really like playing over it earlier, with smooth transitions between video clips, and special effects of certain parts, that video will most likely be enjoyable to watch, but it isn't fun. On the other hand, if you are playing a game with friends and are winning a few of the rounds, that may be enjoyable and fun. Most people play games to have fun. Games themselves, however, are not inherently fun. Fun is what you pull out of a game when you enjoy the gameplay. Fun also is not put into the game. This is complicated, I'm sorry. Here's a way to visualize this. In a science experiment, there are two main variables, which are the independent and the dependent variables. Do you remember these, parents? Okay, I received a reluctant head nod there, so I'll take it as a yes. The independent variable does not rely on the other. It is a variable the scientist has control of. The dependent variable is a variable that gives the scientist a result that correlates with the independent. The independent variable, in this case, is a game. It could be Dark Souls 2, Stakes and Ladders, The Floor is Lava, or anything in between. The dependent variable is the fun you pull out or have as a player. This is similar to how things are not scary. Snakes, zombies, skeletons, and arachnids are all things people might be afraid of, but the thing itself is not scary. You feel scared when you're close to them. The scariness is just an illusion your brain plays on you to keep you out of danger. Personally, I likely will not pull a lot of fun out of playing Snakes and Ladders, but a group of 6-year-old children probably will. The fun you have playing a game is a result formed by a few core elements in game design. Here they are. Where's the next cue card? Some games are very simple, yet very deep. Some games are very complicated and at the same time very surface level. There are two different spectrums at play here, depth and complexity. These are the first two elements that I'm going to talk about and are two major factors that determine playability and, in turn, the greatness of a game. Monopoly is a relatively complex game that is shallow in terms of depth. Almost every action composed in the game is dependent on a dice roll, so it is very difficult to improve your skill set. Monopoly is very luck-based, the same as trading Cards Against Humanity. It is difficult to get better because the winner of the round is solely dependent on the decision made by the judge, which constantly changes every round, and the judge cannot make themselves win the round. The game is more opinionated, and although being hilarious, does not possess the potential for depth that other games have. Depth and complexity complement each other well, and having more depth with less complexity creates better games. Next, I'm going to be comparing two very similar games to support my conclusion on depth and complexity. Chess and checkers. That was loud, sorry. First, the similarities. They're both played on an 8x8 tile checkerboard, and in both games, you and your opponent take turns moving a single piece to a different tile on the board. It is possible to eliminate your opponent's piece from the game in both cases, but the method for this is different between the two. In chess, your piece must land on the tile of the opponent's piece to eliminate it. In checkers, your checker will jump over your opponent's, and you remove the jump checker from the game board. Here's another difference in the gameplay. In checkers, each checker in the game has the exact same capabilities as to where it can move and how far, except when a checker reaches the opposite backline of the board, that checker is kinged and can move in reverse. In chess, there are 6 different pieces on either side, each with their own unique set of movement capabilities. Checkers is simpler in terms of learning the movement of the units, but chess may have more depth. In my opinion, chess is a better game because, although it may have more complexities than checkers, the depth present in chess outweighs the depth in checkers. Another element that is present in games is agency. Agency, in its simplest form, is the amount of control each player has on the game. In Stakes and Ladders, every player in the game has no agency, besides flipping the table. The players are not able to directly affect the outcome of the game in any way. In deep games like Go, chess, and checkers, each player has a lot of agency. For a younger audience, less agency may be more favorable because too many options for how to proceed in a game may overwhelm a young player. Older and more experienced players may desire more agency in a game to feel more that they have earned their victory if they win the game. If the player loses a game in which very little luck or no luck is involved, the player will learn that losing was their own fault, not the bad luck the game struck on them. Chess is a game that has a large amount of agency involved. If you do not move a piece, it will not move. Of course, you must move one and only one piece per turn, but you can choose to keep a specific piece where it is. If you choose to move it to a different space on the board, that action will play out. Imagine if a variation of chess was made where, after every single turn, the roles of every piece switched with another piece, and this was completely unpredictable. If you moved a piece in one turn, it probably won't have an effect on the outcome of the game because of the randomness. A game like this may be enjoyable to watch because it may be exciting to know how the pieces switch roles, but the agency each player has would be far less than in the original game of chess. If the changing of the pieces was predictable, the game would have a similar amount of agency to the original, but the game would be far more complex. When it comes to agency, here's my opinion. If you could give the player either a lot or a little, give them a lot. I just talked about depth, complexity, and agency in games, but that information may seem a little bit hard to comprehend. To simplify this information, I've decided to summarize it into 4 different major elements. At this time, I present to you the 4 C's: challenge, choice, change, and chance. In all games, there is some kind of challenge the player or players face. In the classic child's game Tag, the challenge for the player who is it is to attempt to tag another player. The challenge that exists for the players who are not it is to evade the player who is it and not get tagged. In a puzzle game, the challenge is to, well, solve the puzzle. In some games, players create their own challenges, like trying to complete a video game as fast as possible. This is more commonly known as speedrunning, or completing a campaign in a shooter game without killing any enemy. These are known as pacifist runs. If a game does not have a challenge, it is most likely not even a game. It is a toy. A toy car, for example, is just an object to play with no real goal to strive towards, or a challenge to overcome. With Hot Wheels toy cars and modular tracks, you could challenge a friend to race a car down a track against one of your Hot Wheels cars and see who wins the race. That would be considered a game, but a toy car on its own is not considered a game. The main difference between toys and games is the existence or non-existence of a challenge. The second element I'm going to elaborate on here is choice. Choice is what the player uses to overcome a challenge. The choices you make in a game may affect whether you win or lose that Hot Wheels race, or if you get tagged in a game of tag or not. Choice is important because if the player has no choice, they will most likely ask themselves, why am I playing, and stop. If the player makes choices that does not affect anything, the player will not find a reason to continue playing. Remember, games are created for players to overcome a challenge, and they will be able to do that by making good choices. Choice is very similar to agency in that it gives freedom to the player to do what they want in the game. At first, players who are playing a game for the first time might make poor decisions because they're still learning how the game works. I'm going to continue using the example of tag to demonstrate how, even in simple games, these elements still apply. If it's your first time playing tag, you might find a good place to hide, then later realize the player who is it found you, and now you're trapped in your hiding spot. Does that ever happen to you guys?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I see a lot of from the grade 6s too. Happens to all of us, like, I don't know, first date. Where was I? You got tagged in the scenario and learned that hiding is not a good idea. After making a poor decision like this, you'll learn from it and become a better player through learning what choices are good ones and what choices are bad ones. Some games are not all about choices. Plinko, for example. In Plinko, you drop a checker into a slot at the top of a wooden board, and the checker bounces off of nails and other objects until it reaches the bottom, where the checker falls into a slot. At this point, you might earn a prize for what bucket the checker settled in. The only choice you might make in this game is where you drop the checker at the beginning, and that rarely has any influence on the outcome of the game. So Plinko might be considered a game that is all up to chance. Other games, like Pokemon, are based heavily on choice. Both the Pokemon card game and video games. Both the card game and video game renderings of Pokemon give the player many options for how they want to progress, what creatures they want to catch, and what attacks they use in battles to try to win. What is a game without the element of choice? If you extract the ability for the player to make choices in a game, the game becomes more of a movie, but an interactive one. You'd more so watch the game happen instead of playing it. In low-choice games, or games where the player has little ability to make choices to affect the outcome of the game, there is usually some complaint about the player thinking that they cannot do anything that matters, and the story continues. Choice matters in games because it is what separates the mediocre players from the outstanding ones. The next element I will talk about is change. Change gives the player more content to play through, as well as different dynamic challenges. If Super Mario Bros. Only had the first level, everyone who played the game would get bored very quickly. After you complete that single level, there would be nothing more to do. Because the game has many levels, players strive to complete each next level when they complete one. Each level changes in certain ways from the previous. Whether it gets harder, it gets longer, or the game introduces another dynamic, like a new enemy, collectible, or ability the player can use. For some players, the satisfaction of completing progressively more difficult levels in a game drives the player to keep playing. Games like Super Mario Bros. Have micro-challenges, and what these are usually quick, simple tests of the player's skill. A micro-challenge could be kill this enemy or jump the gap. Micro-challenges are also what changes in a lot of games. In crossword puzzles, there is always going to be an empty matrix of squares to fill in with letters to form words, and in Sudoku puzzles, there's always going to be a square grid to fill in using numbers. There are a virtually infinite amount of possible crossword and Sudoku puzzles for newspapers to produce every day. If you solve a puzzle, you will feel a sense of accomplishment, but solving it again will not likely provide any further sense of satisfaction. Solving variations of the same puzzles, like Sudoku and crossword, do give a sense of accomplishment. Now you ask, what is a game without change? Without change, a game would only have one level and no variety of challenges to overcome. Remember, a game is made up of a series of micro-challenges, and different sets of micro-challenges make up levels. Without a change in micro-challenges, a game would only have one, and the game would be over in a snap. Imagine the original 8-bit Super Mario Bros. Game. If there was only one level, and only one pit to jump over, one Goomba to stomp on, that's a common anime by the way, and one coin to collect, you might stomp on the Goomba, jump the pit, collect the coin, and complete the level. The game with no change is now over with nothing more to do. The last of the 4 elements is chance. Chance is the opposite of choice. With choice, you have control, at least to some extent. With chance, you do not have control. It is up to chance. As you play through a video game, you might make plans to collect more coins, acquire better weapons, and solve difficult problems in innovative ways. When the game is left to chance, your gaming skills are fully put to the test. Chance comes down to luck. Professional gamers learn how to adapt to the changing gameplay and become more successful, similar to how a wild animal adapts to live in certain conditions out in the wilderness. Here's a scenario. You and an opponent are randomly given a weapon in a video game to fight with. This is Mortal Kombat, by the way. The weapon that you are given might be better or worse than your opponent's, but if you learn how to use that one weapon effectively, you might win that 1-versus-1 fight against your opponent, even if the weapon you were randomly given is worse than the weapon your opponent received. Chance exists in different ways, from dice rolls to picking a chance card in Monopoly to gambling in casino games. A game without chance simply becomes a puzzle. Puzzles can be fun, but once you solve a puzzle, it does not provide further entertainment to the player. This is why, like I mentioned with change, there are many different variations of similar puzzles. But if the same puzzle is given to a player multiple times in a game, it becomes trivial and boring. Now's the fun part. What would a game be like with all these 4 elements taken out? Well, a game with a nice balance of all 4 would shape up like this. The game would give the player a challenge. The player may make choices to overcome the challenge, although chance may impede the player's progress. The choices the player makes change the state of the game, so the player must always assess the situation and make a decision. Ad-libbing here, just like the game of life. In life, you might strive to complete a challenge, like getting your dream job, and you make choices to get there, like trying to get an interview, or I don't know, renovate your house. And change happens, whether it's good or bad. I see you laughing from that side. It's not funny. Sometimes things come down to chance. Maybe you don't get the interview, or some meteor hits your house. That's not. I came up with that on the spot. I'm swear it's not even here. A game with none of these elements would not give the player anything to strive towards, no ability to affect what happens, but at the same time no luck-based events, while everything stays the same. Not fun. In short, your game with none of the 4 C's has literally become a photograph. I know that photos can be beautiful and all, but I'm pretty confident they aren't fun. Beautiful though. After learning about the core elements of game design, I've decided to create my own board game that takes into account all of these aspects. I wanted to make a multiplayer board game so I can learn how teenagers of my age and slightly younger approach new games. Additionally, new players might try the game out for different reasons. Some might play solely to have fun, some might play with some vigor to feel the satisfaction of winning, and some might play only to socialize with their friends, caring very little about winning. To find an answer to this, I wanted to make a game for 4 players that is relatively simple yet deep, providing the players the ability to develop their own strategies as they play and get a general feel of the game. The challenge that players would need to overcome would be the other team, because this is a competitive game. In the game, players can choose where they move their player pieces and what special ability cards they want to use and when. Because players will easily be able to identify their mistakes by their effects, they might want to change their strategy. This in turn will change the game. Because players cannot predict what special ability cards they pick up before every turn, chance is also involved in the game. After explaining my thought process for my game vision, I present the details for my vision. My game will be for players of ages 10 plus with a maximum player capacity of 4 players. Each player will be able to move 4 different pawns on the board. I'm going to create a game that imitates soccer, yet has a few variations that make it different from the real-life sport. There will be action cards, which I've previously labeled as special ability cards, that players will pick up at the start of every turn. These are things like shoot, pass, tackle, and so on. I will design the game so that each individual match only lasts 10 to 15 minutes. Experiencing a game happens in the player's mind, and the human brain has many limitations developers should know about and take into consideration in their game design. As talked about previously, I created a board game to see if I can harness the 4 major elements of game design, and in creating the board game, I wanted to support my creation method with psychological evidence to explain why I made the game the way I did. Here is the psychology side of the matter. First, the human mind does not want to work more than it has to. People will naturally want to do the least amount of work to complete a certain task. To remember this, think of flowing water. Water will flow downhill and move through or around any obstacle it has to get past in order to keep moving. Water takes the path of least resistance. When creating my game, I did the same. I wanted to make the game very simple both in construction and in rule set so that it would be easier for both myself and my fellow playtesters to build and play. Next, the human mind has limitations, and one of these, is, among others, is memory. The human mind can only memorize so much information, and I took this into account in my board game design as well. I made my board game simple and easy to learn so that playtesters can get to playing right away. Making the game more complicated would only make it more difficult for myself and my playtesters to either explain or play. People make mistakes often. It is what makes us who we are as humans. It is conceivable that I also make mistakes in creating my board game, and this is another reason that I wanted to make my board game simple. If I tried to do anything unnecessarily beautiful on the game board, I might mess up a certain part of the design. Any convoluted designs on the game board might also confuse players into thinking it is part of the gameplay. When thinking of psychology, one concept that comes to mind is attention. In the year 2000, the human attention span was approximately 12 seconds. After the mobile phone revolution, that number has dropped to 8 seconds, humans. Knowing this, I wanted to make each player's turn short so they can take often brain breaks between turns. Additionally, I wanted to make play times of the entire game relatively short so that players do not have to focus for too long. If you've ever worked on something for a few hours at a time, you will know that eventually you'll feel that you need to take a break from working because you're not being productive anymore. Players playtesting my board game might feel the same way playing my game. If a game goes on for too long, they might lose focus or lose interest. Making a game with quick playtimes may help prevent this. Will help prevent this. In conclusion, that's a hard word to say, when it comes to games, there are many different factors that play into whether it is great or not. The 3 elements I mentioned earlier in this presentation, depth, complexity, and agency, can be simplified to fit the 4 C's. Agency is very similar to choice, because more of either of these give you more freedom in a game. Choice also complements chance, with chance being the parts of a game that you as a player are not able to affect. Chances are luck-based, and choices are generally skill-based. And a nice balance of these take a step in the right direction to making a game great. Depth and complexity both account for the level of challenge present in a game, but complexity does more so. Depth has a close relationship with change or a game's ability to provide players with different experiences. When students came to test my board game, I found that they mostly played for the lighthearted fun of it because it was their first time trying out the game. Because the players were still getting a feel for the game, they had the incentive to experiment with different strategies to figure out the most effective one. The next time you play any kind of game, whether it's chess, Fortnite, or Kahoot, and you lose, you can confidently say that either the challenge was too demanding, the choice to chance balance was lopsided in favor of chance, or there was no change in the game, not giving you any chances to turn the tides of the game. All in all, this will make you sound like a gaming expert. I didn't even plan for that to be a joke. At this time, I'd like to thank multiple people for the help they've given me on this project for the past 9 months. First, I'd like to thank Scott Harrington, the head of school, for always showing up to Skype meetings and keeping me on track while I was working on my paper. He also admitted that he is a newbie when it comes to games. Second, Edward Douglas. Edward did a lot to help me put my paper together as well as playtest my board game for 2.5 hours straight. He also taught me that nextly isn't a word. Remember that? He remembers it fondly, too. Third, all of my fellow playtesters, put your hand up, by the way. Where are you guys?
Game testers, put your hands up.
Oh yeah, Charlotte. We got someone back there. Got a few hands over here. Sam, Florin, Kaylin, Colin. Thank you all. Thank you to all my fellow playtesters who tried out my game and found every flaw in the design. Thank you. Next, Jen Henriksen for checking in frequently to see if I'm working on my paper. Guess what? I was. Mom and Dad, I'd like to thank you as well. You always framed the act of working on Masterworks as a suggestion, not a requirement. This was oddly enlightening. Finally, I would like to thank all of you, students, parents, and teachers, for taking the time out of your morning to come listen in on my presentation. Thank you all so much for coming.
First, I need to make an important, happy announcement that Mr. Jake Deluise has met all the requirements of the Masterworks program at Iron City School.